I'm non-zero sum James, your companion on this exploration of win-win games. Hi Vince, how's it going?
Hi James. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm good. Hi from sunny Cardiff, which is unusual. How are you?
Good. For listeners, this is our first interview on the podcast with Vince Knight, who's a senior lecturer in game theory at Cardiff University in the UK, on the other side of the world. So while it's the end of a long day for me in New Zealand, it's a good morning to you, Vince.
That's right. Yeah, I just got the kids out the door. And it's quite an honor to be the first one. As I said when we had a little chat beforehand, like I really enjoy your podcast. So yeah, it's really nice to be the first one on. I'm looking forward to your next interviews, to be honest.
Oh, that's so cool. It's really nice when I hear people who are actually qualified on the subject enjoying the content. So to kick off, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you came to be where you are now?
Sure. So I'm a mathematician at Cardiff University in Wales. I don't know how far back you want me to bore your listeners.
All the way.
All the way. When I tell my life story to whoever finds my accent a bit puzzling, you can see my kids do this big eye roll of like, here we go again. So yeah, I was born in Nigeria and we moved to South Africa when I was quite young. Then lived in the Caribbean. Ended up living on a French department in the Caribbean up until I was 16. I went through an interesting phase during my high school education of, at the first couple of years in high school, I was very, very good at mathematics, but I didn't have to try hard at all. Like it was just, this is easy, I get it. And then all of a sudden the difficulty went up and kind of that thing that happens when I've never had to work hard at something hit me. And all of a sudden I was like, everyone's been telling me all my life that I'm good at maths as opposed to, getting rewarded for working at it.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of accepted that I was bad at school. And I was like, you know what? I'm just not good at this anymore. And decided to not work and just accept that was who I was. And I had this one physics teacher who wouldn't let me and just kind of like put me in positions where I could get rewarded for working, if that makes sense.
Right.
And that sparked my second love affair with the subject, I'd say. Like I really fell back in love with mathematics at that point. I love the subject because it's so simple and yet so complicated, and what you put in is what you get out. And went off to a rugby school in the east of France.
Which, it wasn't Start to Lose, was it? By any chance?
No. It was the east of France. It's a small little town in the Jura Mountains, just overlooking the Swiss mountains and Geneva. It's a beautiful part of the world.
Yeah.
I was playing a lot of rugby in Guadeloupe, which is the island in the Caribbean, and I was like, hey, I'd like to maybe do this a bit more. I always wanted more academics from that point. And one summer, my parents and we went to visit this school that said they would have this random kid from across the Atlantic. And when I got there, it was gloomy. It was dark. Not at all Toulouse, right? It's up in the mountains. It's cold. The sun doesn't shine. Yeah. And my mom tells a story of how she would look at me in the back seat and she could see the dread on my face because I was like, I can't come here. But at the same time, I've made my parents fly us all the way out here to see. Oh no, what am I going to do? I called my best friend. Like, what am I going to do? And my mom was really cool. She just went, this is why we came. We came to see if you'd like it. And then the very next day, the two rugby coaches kind of like met us. And I just fell in love with the place. It was the two best years of my life.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I know from one of your recent podcast episodes, you go on these tours, right, with rugby teams from California. Is that right, James?
Yeah, the reason I ask is because that rugby program is headed by this guy, Stuart Crone,
right?
Sort of charismatic coach. And he's detailed his rugby career to me over the years. And he spent some of his university time at Start to Lose.
Oh, no way. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, yeah. No, we did not cross paths. Thank God. Play in the fourth division of the French tier. They're not at all Toulouse. Yet. I should say yet. And then I went to study mathematics at Cardiff. And from my first interactions with that one physics teacher, I started saying, like, I want to do a PhD in mathematics without really knowing what that meant. And graduated with my bachelor's degree from Cardiff, and I stayed on with a brilliant supervisor to do my PhD in pure mathematics. Slowly shifted to do a lot more applied mathematics. So we got this really big, strong group at Cardiff where we model healthcare systems. So we model waiting lists and queues. We do mathematics that helps schedule theaters and stuff like that.
Okay.
And that slowly led me to game theory, which I guess is why I'm here.
Yeah. So you were saying about how you were doing work with hospital waiting lists and queues that got you into sort of systems thinking. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So started working with this good research group we have in Cardiff that does all this healthcare modeling. Mm-hmm. And it was just as the UK government was trying to introduce patient choice.
Right.
Because we have a public healthcare system, and part of that public healthcare system is officially, according to the rules, patients don't get to choose where they go.
Okay.
And the government was trying to introduce a policy where, like, no, patients are going to be allowed to have choice.
All right.
And I immediately started to wonder, what does the effect of having patients choose where they go have on the strategic behavior and the performance of a system? And so that led me to game theory. And there's some really cool results that you can find and use in game theory. I don't know if you've heard of Braze's paradox.
No, tell me about Braze's paradox.
Okay, let me take a sidestep from there. So Braze's paradox is this simple idea, and you could write down a very simple little picture with arrows on it. Mm-hmm. If you have a network that suffers from congestion, so you could think of that as hospital waiting lists, or you could think of that as highways, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a system that suffers from congestion, you might think that adding capacity to the system can only help, right? If you've got a big motorway and we add an extra lane or we add a bypass or something like that, it can't do any damage. And you can show mathematically that that's not true. It would only be true if you could centrally control what each individual using that road does, right? If you could kind of go, well, you know what, James, today you have to go the long way because Vince is taking the shortcut today, right? And you have no say in that matter, no individual rationality in that matter. Then, yes, adding capacity to the network is absolutely going to make it better.
Yes.
But Braze's paradox can show that actually, once individuals want to use the new capacity, it can actually make the traffic jams or the waiting lists or any other type of congestion worse. There's a big highway in North America where Braze's paradox cost millions, if not billions of dollars, where they built this huge project, cost a huge amount of money, and it made the traffic worse. So they actually ended up closing it a few days later. So this basic idea of adding capacity is in itself a good thing. But if it's coupled with individuals doing what's best for themselves, and I'm not, this is the interesting idea, right? It's not that individuals are trying to make things worse. They're doing exactly what they should do. That it can make the system worse for everybody. And there's a whole area of game theory that looks at that. And so that was my first introduction to game theory, was looking at that in the setting of hospitals, waiting lists, and things like that, which is when, this idea, you've done a whole series recently on emergence, right? This idea that through individual actions, you don't necessarily know what the emergent behavior is going to be, right? And that's what game theory allows you to capture, which is such a cool aspect of the topic.
That made me think of something I learned when I was a kid. I remember my dad telling me about how they remove rubbish bins from places because having too many rubbish bins around the place actually attracts more rubbish.
That's so interesting.
And people take less responsibility for their own rubbish.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, so it's a similar...
Yeah, that's exactly the same thing. Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of behavioral science and psychology in there. That's really interesting.
And you made me think of another thing as well. I wonder if it's a slightly different route, but with all the different competing maps software in your cars, I've run into the situation sometimes where it's given me a shortcut, and then I've had the realization that lots of other people have also been given that very same shortcut. So a very low capacity road suddenly has all of the motorway traffic on it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly it, right?
But if we're all using the same mapping software and it could coordinate, then we wouldn't have that problem.
Exactly. And sometimes your journey might be worse than mine, but on average, it will be good for everybody, right? And that's that's that interesting thing. And so that first foray into game theory and this emergent behavior that comes from the micro rules. I do a lot of work with the Python programming language, and I ended up being one of the first people to help run the Namibian Python conference, the first Namibian Python conference.
Right.
Which is a wonderful project in itself, and it's a nice example of a really thriving community now, and open source software in Africa is doing incredibly well.
Wow.
But basically on one day, someone just went, Vince, you need to give a talk. And this happens at conferences, especially ones that are kind of like starting out. All of a sudden you have to be ready to, talk about something. And so I said, okay. And so I threw together a few lines of code to repeat the somewhat famous tournament run by Robert Axelrod on the Prisoner's Dilemma.
Yep.
I'm happy to go into that a little bit.
I guess it would be good to flesh it out here.
Yeah.
Since this is the first interview, maybe we should do a little primer
on the Prisoner's Dilemma. Yeah. To start at the end, the field I would describe myself as working in now is called direct reciprocity. All right. And direct reciprocity is this idea that I do nice things for you because I want you to do nice things back. Right. And, there's all sorts of ideas there. It's almost biblical, and do unto others as you want to be done unto yourselves. But also it's
right, the golden rule.
Exactly right. But also from an evolutionary perspective, right? Why do we cooperate? And this basic idea was first really studied in the 70s and 80s. And a guy called Robert Axelrod ran a computer tournament where he asked people to play something called the iterated Prisoner's Dilemma. And the Prisoner's Dilemma has a story behind it, but sometimes the story is actually kind of distracting from the building blocks that it is. But the story is, imagine there's two of us, so you and I, we've committed a crime together, and the police have caught us, and just like in any good TV show, they've separated us for questioning. And they tell me, Vince, we'll let you go to prison for less time if you give us the details of what James did. But they offer you the same deal about me, right? So we both have this incentive to admit something as a deal, right? If we both keep quiet, if we both don't say anything, so in other words, if you and I cooperate with each other, we won't go to prison for as long as we otherwise would.
Right.
But the downside is that if we both defect, if we both give evidence about each other, then we both go to prison for longer, right? And that's called a prisoner's dilemma, and the fact that it's about prisoners and going to prison, somewhat artificial. Really, it's a model of doing something for someone else, even though it's worse for you, right?
Yes.
But where that gets really interesting is when you start to repeat it. And so if you imagine that we're not just doing it once, but we're doing it again and again and again. And every time I make a decision about whether or not to cooperate with you or to defect against you, I keep in mind what's happened our entire history of interactions, right?
Yes.
So I might go, well, James stabbed me in the back last time, so I'm going to stab him in the back this time, right? Or I might say, you know what? James said that he was going to cooperate and he stuck to his word, so I'm going to stick to mine too, right? And so if you think about this in a more general framework of direct reciprocity, that basic idea can be argued is a model of every interaction between anything, right?
Right.
I could always take a little bit more from our relationship, but I have a reason to give a little bit more so that it builds up my reputation. So you give me more in the future, right?
Right, yeah.
And Robert Axelrod ran this computer tournament where he invited people to write computer code that played this game against each other. And so he ran 2 tournaments. He ran one with about 15 strategies. So 15 submissions. This was back in the day, so people were literally sending the code on paper to him, and he had to put it into the computer and everything. And then he ran another one with 64. And the interesting result that came out of both of those is that one strategy won both of them. Yeah. And the strategy that won both of them even won the second one when people who submitted strategies to the second one knew what happened in the first one. So they knew the strategy won. And the strategy that won is wonderfully simple. It's called tit for tat. And it just starts by cooperating, and then it just does whatever you did, whatever your opponent did, your co-player did in the previous round, right? So it's very much the golden rule, right? Like, if you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you, but if you wrong me, I'll wrong you right back. The important thing, though, about this strategy is that it wants to forgive, right? So if you defect, but then you start cooperating again, I will cooperate again. Lots of papers have been written about this work by Robert Axelrod, and going back to this Python conference in Namibia, I thought I have to show something cool, and obviously I'm a game theorist, what will I do? I put together some lines of code to play a few strategies of this tournament. And after that, I released the code on the internet, on GitHub, and it kind of took on this life of its own where lots of people started contributing and lots of people started adding to it, and it ended up being a huge part of my research, and more importantly, a really nice open source project where everyone can kind of use these strategies, study the game, but also to contribute them.
So students all over the world can use this, and they can add to it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we've had submissions from experts in the field, and we've had submissions from high schoolers, which has been kind of cool.
That's cool. I remember there being some other interesting strategies in Axelrod's experiment. There was one called a grudger, I think, where it wouldn't forgive.
Exactly.
And you would think that one, having a sort of very human response, might have some utility, but it didn't do as well as simple tit for tat, right?
It doesn't do well because, exactly. So basically what it does is go like, I'll be cool with you, but wrong me once, that's it. And so what it'll do is it'll have a better outcome than every one of the individuals it's playing with, right? But it'll just be better. It won't be good, right? And so this idea of extortion, there's lots of instances in the modern world right now in politics where we see that, where, some, say, individuals are more interested in doing better than someone else than together coming up and doing well.
Yeah.
The entire premise of non-zero-sum games, the idea is that we can do well together, even if maybe you do slightly better than me, which doesn't really matter, right?
We're looking for a higher absolute value across both of us.
Exactly, as opposed to a relative one.
Yes.
Exactly.
So 2 of the Axelrod experiments ended up with the same result, but did your ongoing experiment yield more positive, successful?
That's a really interesting question, because those 2 first tournaments where Robert Axelrod were, tit for tat won, is so lovely. It's such a nice result because tit for tat is so simple. And so Robert Axelrod came up with these rules that describe what you have to do to get cooperation, because tit for tat fundamentally wants to cooperate. And one of the rules, for example, was you have to be simple, because tit for tat is simple. There were some strategies in Axelrod's original tournament that were quite complicated. They used these complicated statistical tests to try and get into your co-player's mind and understand what they were doing and all those things, right? And fundamentally, what would often happen is strategies against those ones would go like, you know what? I don't know what you're doing, so I'm just going to defect to protect myself. So there's this idea that actually simple strategies was an important factor. And that shaped a huge wealth of research where mathematicians and game theorists and biologists have really concentrated on simple strategies. But what we found when we've been replicating the results is, yes, that works for that particular tournament. But actually, when you extrapolate to the huge number of tournaments we can now run because of the open source nature of the library, the results don't quite follow. Tit for tat doesn't always do well. Sometimes very complicated strategies do well. And, the rules, the properties of what it takes become a bit more subtle. You have to map yourself to the environment you're in and be kind of cooperative relative to that environment. So sometimes if you're in an environment that is very defective, very uncooperative, you know what? The best thing you need to do is be defective and uncooperative, because fundamentally the absolute average score will be quite low anyway.
Yes.
But at the same time, and what we started doing is training far more complicated strategies, nowhere near as complicated as a human brain, but with the same kind of structure, slightly. I could hear some of my collaborators say, how dare you say it's as complicated as a human brain? I'm not. That allow themselves to kind of recognize the environment they're in and shift to it. Or indeed recognize individuals that are like themselves. So Robert Axelrod's original tournament was just that. It was a tournament.
Yes.
And we're about to publish a paper where we actually replicate his exact tournament.
Right.
And we see what happens if you'd been able to put a few more strategies in there, right? So if we could go back in time and throw a couple more strategies into his original invitation, how would that change the results? And what's actually interesting is you'd have to throw quite a lot of strategies in there to change them, which really shows how much that particular tournament was very, very specific, right? It was very specific set of properties in it.
Did you discover anything from yours that was depressing in that a strategy that was more nefarious did well?
Not really, right? Because fundamentally what we still see is that cooperation can emerge, right? And there's lots of cases where cooperation can emerge. I think in a way it was kind of nice to almost validate what we see every day, is that we are complicated human beings, right? Or countries are complicated, governments are complicated, animals are complicated, people are complicated. And so we're not just a simple, as long as you always do it this way, you'll be fine, right? And that golden rule, well, you know what? If I'm having a bad day, maybe I am just going to be a bit of a dick, right? And that might be because of my particular frame of mind, right? But then can we still get emergent behavior where you have a sophisticated behavior that recognizes, well, maybe that was just something off about Vince today, right?
You've got some inbuilt redundancies.
Exactly. So I think if anything, the fact that we can still see emergent cooperation, we can still see strong cooperation in direct reciprocity, even when we have more complicated behaviors, is quite nice. Because often something that can get thrown at game theory is that, sure, you're looking at these fundamental relationships, but human beings are far more complicated than that, right? And human beings spoil the mathematics all the time.
Yeah.
But actually what we've begun to show is that even in complexity, you can still have emergent cooperation, which I don't feel that that's a negative. Was it a bit depressing to realize that that lovely result that tit for tat is best doesn't hold? Not really.
If they were generally cooperative strategies, then that's still a positive result, I guess. I was thinking it would only be negative if there was a particularly pernicious strategy that ended up sneaking in there. Yeah, really what we see is, because the environment matters, if you have one really nefarious character that comes in, right, will that behavior spread? Okay, and so this is where we get into more evolutionary game theory type ideas, where there's these models that you can use that look at using the same kind of ideas of evolution at behavior spread based on how well that does. And there are some environments where you put something nefarious in, that nefarious behavior will change and we all become defectors. But then there'll be some where actually, as cooperators, we kind of band together and push out that defector, right? Yes.
So I'm doing some really cool work at the moment with a political scientist called Sebastian Kappel from Amsterdam. He's a really interesting guy because he is a political scientist and he understands those aspects, but he's also very interested in evolutionary game theory, which is where I suppose I've been kindly dragged in. And we did some work looking at extortion. And so game theorists in about 2012 came up with a way of playing the iterated prisoner's dilemma, where they showed quite a gloomy picture that you can write down these formulae for these strategies that are called extortionate strategies, called zero determinant extortionate strategies. And it's a really cool mathematical tricks that they use. And from a mathematical point of view, it's so beautiful and elegant. But it paints a negative picture because it says, actually, I can now play in a way that I am guaranteed to do some amount better than you. And this goes back to what we were saying before. It's about the relative win, not the absolute win, right? And what Sebastian's idea was what if we model international trade that way? You know, if you think about the changes in America with tariffs, tariffs are about beating the other one, right? Tariffs are about doing better than your trade partner.
It's relative,
Exactly.
It's a zero-sum approach, isn't it?
Exactly, right? And so we built this model where we model the entire planet of international trade and whether or not they use extortive strategies from this 2012 paper or whether or not they work together. And the countries have different approaches. You know, if a small country, don't want to pick on anyone, but I'll pick on me. If a small country like Wales said to China, we're putting tariffs on you, I don't know if China would notice, right? And I'm not enough of an expert to even comment on that. But of course, if America puts trade tariffs on China, China notices, right? So the big players, which are obviously America, the European Union, and China, what we could see is that if you introduce this extortionate behavior with America, if you say America is going to start acting extortionately, so only be interested in that relative win, that actually, no, that behavior won't spread if the other big countries who still want to play nice with each other, so to speak, kind of come together. So there's a lot of hope out there. You know, it's not all going to happen by itself, but you know, that non-zero sum behavior can absolutely pervade and push out the nefarious actors, like you're saying.
Yes, you hope so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was going to ask you about international relations and political liberalism versus realpolitik, because I think that's the challenge we're seeing with tariffs, is this idea of countries treating each other like competitive enemies rather than realizing that they can benefit a lot from each other through the trade that has naturally emerged over the last century or two. I mean, I don't want to book your next guest for you, but Sebastian would have a lot of stuff to say on that.
You speak about it far better than me in terms of the actual political sides of things. But my understanding is that a huge vector for peace is trade agreements, right? Like by having trade agreements between countries, you're less likely to want to attack each other, assuming some level of rationality.
No, exactly, because you both lose.
We both lose, right? Yeah.
Even from sanctions cost the people making the sanctions as well, because it means they can't get the same goods at the same price.
Exactly.
I wanted to talk more about how you saw the Axelrod experiment reflecting how social norms in society arise. We've talked a little bit about how they work geopolitically.
Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about how you see that reflected in our normal social norms?
I think that's a lovely question, because in a way, like, geopolitically is a very small aspect of this, right? But what's so beautiful about the study of direct reciprocity is I think it's like this fundamental thing, right? And I say you can think of it as something as simple as why'd you hold the door open for someone, right? Like, if you're walking towards the door and I'm there first, I'll probably hold the door open for you. Like,
right.
And that is a cost, right? There's a cost associated. I'm now, I don't know, a tenth of a second later than I would have been. I'm slightly, fractionally more tired from holding open the door, right? But
yeah.
And I'm also likely to never see you again anyway. So why do I even bother doing it, right? Where does that social norm come from? And but fundamentally, and I know this whenever I say this to my students, I have to kind of caveat it, because obviously there's wars and there's conflict and there's people yelling at each other on the internet. But we are fundamentally a very cooperative species. You know, we do work together, and our social norms are certainly being tested at the moment in certain places, right? Where things you thought were not norms, you realize are just norms and can be just ignored. But this exact idea of these norms that can just emerge. And what's so nice about studying it through the lens of direct reciprocity is that you don't have to kind of assume anything.
Right.
That you can show that these social norms, these individual social behaviors happen because they're better for us individually, right? So mathematically, I can answer my question about why am I holding open the door for you? And I'm doing that because on an evolutionary basis, if I do that, I am more likely to have someone else help me in the future, right? Through some direct or indirect reciprocity, which is another subset of the field. So that's what's so lovely about this, is that you don't need to kind of go like, well, why is that happening? I don't know. You can go, because it's better for you.
Yes, yeah.
I don't know if you ever watched Friends back in the day, and it's probably dating me to the people that listen to the show. There's this wonderful episode of Friends where Phoebe tries to find a selfless act, and Ross kind of goes like, there is no selfless act. To the point that I think Phoebe at one point lets a bee sting her so that the bee feels good about itself, or something like that. And then Ross points out, well, now the bee's dead. And so she's like, oh no, what have I done? And this kind of like thing of like, is there such a thing as a selfless act? And what this field kind of shows is there doesn't have to be. It's, we can all on some fundamental level be doing this because it is better for ourselves, right?
Yes. I mean, that's kind of the project of the site, really, is that idea that you don't have to compromise individual benefits for collective goods.
Yes.
There's often a lot of overlap between collective goods and individual goods. And these social norms, they're actually so common that often they're invisible to us.
Exactly.
And so are the benefits too.
Exactly.
And then somebody who comes along and starts to subvert those norms, suddenly there's a whole load of disasters that nobody realized was going to happen, or at least they didn't realize was going to happen.
Exactly. Everyone's kind of like shell-shocked of like, can you just do that? But I mean, you're a parent. I've got two children, and I think it's been really interesting, as we're learning on the job, right? Figuring out, sometimes our kids will ask me, well, why don't we do that? And I sometimes have to take a moment, because I don't want to just go, oh, just because, right? I kind of like want to have an answer for that. And sometimes I have to, I look at myself, or I'll turn to my wife and I'll go like, why do we do it that way? Yeah. Like, is there a good reason for this? And sometimes when you introspect, you realize, oh, there is, and this is why, and this is that. Or sometimes we've come to telling our kids, because it's social convention. There's no real reason one way or another, but we do it because it's social convention, and that is important in itself.
Oh, no, my daughter definitely knows how to stay up later. She'll ask me some question about why humans act this way on mass. And I'm like, well, and then I start to start to piece together my own little folk theory.
Yeah.
And dad's explain it to her.
It is funny sometimes. They'll ask me to do something and I'm busy or whatever, and it's something I'm not that excited about. I very quickly stick to like, no, I'm busy. I got to do this. I'm sorry. But if it's something that I actually find cool, I'll be like, yeah, sure, I can do the dishwasher another time, you know?
When you were talking about doing something for someone who you're never going to meet again, I have this kind of idea that positivity or negativity is contagious. And if you pass positivity on to somebody else, like you hold the door open for them, that's just going to put them in a better mood. And whoever they run into, they'll do something nice for them.
That's such a nice way of putting it.
But I had the experience the other day of the negative, where we've been selling a house and I was just turning up to the house to prepare it for the person to move in. So I was trying to make it look all nice.
Yeah.
And as I got there, there was a pretty rough looking dude with his big pit bull squatting at the front of the house, about 50 meters away from me. The dog was squatting, not the guy.
I get it. Yeah.
And then they just walked off.
Oh, no.
I don't know what it was that possessed me. My wife was there and I was like, I should say something. And I said, oi, pick it up. And he sort of turned around and said, not mine.
What?
And I went over and the dog had just peed on a poop that was already there. And by that time, the guy had walked off and I was like, I just created a negative infection there. Like that guy's going to go, he's going to be pissed off and... you know, I've kind of ruined his day. Yeah. Because I accused him of something he didn't do.
Yeah.
And it happens very rarely, but it becomes a sort of formative memory for me. And I'm like, okay.
Absolutely. No, I know exactly. And
definitely think twice before you step in and accuse someone of something.
You know, and it might have been because, you know, as you're getting to the house, you're, you know, trying to think about how you do what you got to do quickly in the house. And so you're not quite like in that perfect, and I know no one's perfect, but you're not quite in that perfect emotional state. And then all of a sudden something happens and then that grows and grows. And, you know, talking about it as contagion is so nice. So there's these models of evolution that use differential equations, or a type of equation that models things over time.
Okay.
And you can see the spread of cooperation in a population, right? A hypothetical population. And these graphs often look exactly like the graphs that you use to model things like a pandemic or a virus. So mathematically, the spread of cooperative behavior is very much like a virus.
Yeah. It's one of those things that fascinates me. I've got this idea for a story actually called Legacy, and it starts at a funeral and someone's died.
Okay.
And the whole story is about the way that person influences all the people at the funeral's future behavior.
Oh, that's lovely.
So it's the person's life continued through the people they influenced. And so we jump from person to person through the story, but it feels like a single character.
That sounds like a really cool story.
I don't know if I have the skills to write that. I'm not a writer.
Keanu Reeves gave one of my favorite answers ever to a question. He's on Stephen Colbert's late night show. And he has a series of questions that he asks everybody. He always asks, what do you think happens when you die? And he asked Keanu Reeves this. I mean, Keanu Reeves is just cool, right? He's very, very cool and very suave. He could have probably said anything and it would have sounded cool. And he just thinks for a bit and he goes, the ones that love you miss you.
Yeah.
In a way, that's the same thing, right? Like you still have that impact on people even when you're gone, right?
He's like, that's the important thing no matter what.
Exactly. No matter what actually happens, whatever, right? But the important thing is the people that are there, they remember you. And so that impact you have while you're here, even though by the time you're dead, the direct reciprocity idea, perhaps that is when it stops, right? I think it's a great idea for a movie. I think it's a great idea for a story.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that about that being the last reciprocity step, because it makes me think about, we didn't actually cover this, that in the one-shot Prisoner's Dilemma, this is getting technical now, the Nash equilibrium is to defect, right? That's right. The actual rational choice is to defect. And cooperation emerges through the iterated game where you've got a chance to respond to someone and you've got a future to think about, But there's an aspect of game theory called the discount factor.
Yes.
Where as you go through your iterated game, if you know where the iterative game is going to finish, I'm not sure if this is the discount factor.
No,
actually,
I'm shutting up because you're nailing this. I'm shutting up because you're nailing this.
If you know where the iterations are going to finish, the one-shot conclusion starts to be relevant again, and you can start to defect as you move towards that point.
Exactly.
But the way I approach that is, in life, you never know where the last iterative moment is going to be. So you should just play the cooperative game.
You're spot on. So this idea that if we're only going to interact once, then I should defect. And then if you say, okay, what if we're going to interact twice? Well, then the last time we interact, we're no longer investing in our reputation, right? So the last time we interact, we should both defect. But since I know that the last time we interact, we're both going to defect, well, my reputation from the first one is pointless, so I might as well defect in the first one too, right? In Axelrod's first tournament, they played 200 turns, all right?
Right.
And people knew they played 200 turns, and tit for tat still won. In the second tournament, he actually played 5 different lengths. And in any given interaction, you didn't know which of the 5 different lengths you were playing. And so mathematically now what you often do is you essentially model this as if you're flipping a coin. So, you and I arriving at the door, I'm deciding whether or not to open it, hold it open for you. And then we're flipping a coin to find out if that ever happens again, right?
Right, yeah.
And what you can see, and there's a theorem called the Folk theorem in direct reciprocity, what you can see is as long as our probability of future interactions is large enough, then cooperation becomes stable.
Right.
So you could argue that if I'm on my deathbed, well, then I might as well not hold the door open for you because screw you, I'm done, right? You're never going to hold it open for me. But as you say, you never know, and that's kind of the glue that binds us all together, right? Like, why do our social norms emerge where we don't know? Why am I polite to the person in the store, right? I'm probably never going to see them again, but I don't know that, right? I don't know that. And I don't know what impact of my actions now have on my reputation with someone else that might be directly related to who I'm interacting with now. And that's that idea of the discount factor. It's a really nice mathematical framing, actually, because mathematicians either love or hate infinity, right? Depending on which type of mathematician you are. And a lot of the time, discrete mathematicians who like nice finite things will use a discount factor to just discount future gains. And so it's used in economics to say the money I have now is better than the money I'll have in a year, right? Because the money I have now I might not make it for another year, right?
Bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush.
Exactly, right? And that framing is lovely, but it's actually mathematically the exact same framing of the probability of us interacting again.
Right.
Which is what we can use for those things. So, yeah. And that's kind of the glue that brings a lot of this into the social norm kind of ideas.
One of the things I was interested in about the iterated game in Axelrod's project is that it's limited to forced interactions. So there's no, as far as I know, there's no way to just avoid somebody who is a defector. Is that right?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So I'm not familiar with any work that's looked at it where you can avoid, so you can choose to not interact at all. That would be a really interesting one. I know there's some work that's looked at how these interactions change when, you and I interact, but you don't interact with Sebastian, right? And so when you put it on a network and everyone has different things, and I know there's some work that's looked at what happens when that network evolves. And so there's all these results that show how joined up you have to be for cooperation to emerge. One of my collaborators on the Axelrod project, Mark, he's done some cool work where he's like, if you imagine you have like 2 villages separated by a mountain pass, right? So everyone in each village is heavily connected, right? They all interact with each other, but there's only like one person that goes between the villages. Will you have the same spread of behavior or not? And so that impacts things. But the choice to play or not based on the history is not something I'm familiar with. That doesn't mean people haven't looked at that. It's a really interesting idea, though. It's
just an idea that I thought about. I was like, in real life, you'd realize someone was an asshole and you'd avoid them. I partly raised that because I have tried a simulation where I incorporated avoidance.
Nice.
Where you'd have defectors and cooperators. It was a physical simulation where they're sort of floating around in space. And a defector, when it bumped into somebody else, would steal 2 health from any cooperator that it interacted with. 2 defectors would each lose 1, and 2 cooperators would each gain 1.
Yeah.
But the catch was that each agent remembered who had wronged them and was able to spatially avoid them in 2 dimensions.
So if you have wronged me, I would try and move away from you as you're approaching me type thing. Yeah. Oh, fascinating.
So you can kind of see them. They've got like a little eye or a little dot that indicates like, oh, there's someone coming at me that I don't like.
Yeah.
And what we saw was defectors doing very well to begin with. They were these red dots, and they would get very large. As they gained health, they would get bigger. And the blue ones would get smaller and smaller. But over time, what would happen is that the cooperators would eventually avoid all of the defectors and would keep cooperating, and they would grow, and the defectors would eat each other, basically.
Is that on the site, James?
Yes, it's called Capitalizing on Trust. It's very simple.
I need to look that up. That looks really cool.
But it was pretty fragile, though. Putting it together, if I had more than 15% defectors, the whole system crashed. They just died, taking away from each other until everything just went down to 0. And also I needed to implement basically immortality.
Okay.
A fairly significant addition, so that if an agent fell to 0, they stayed alive. They just couldn't contribute anything, but they could receive points. So they could sort of pass out of the equation for a while until somebody came along and gifted them some health.
I wonder what would happen if the speed at which the agents moved was impacted by how many points or health they had, right? So that if the defectors at the start can like get enough, then they'll be able to outrun all the cooperators that are trying to run away. That sounds really cool. Capitalizing on trust. I'm going to look that up.
Oh, actually, there was a game where larger things would eat smaller things.
Is this like the Snake game, like Snake IO or something?
Yes, it was like a Snake game, but except I think they just got bigger, and then you could split. Yes. But as they got bigger, they got slower. So you got a disadvantage.
Yeah. So self-equilibrating, right?
Yeah. So there was a sort of game balance there. But that's not really how it works in the real world, is it? Like, once you get more advantages, you get more opportunities to get more advantages.
That certainly seems to be how we're going. But I guess that's the thing, right? You get those opportunities unless there's some sort of regulation or system that's put in place to ensure that the system works for the benefit of others, right? That's the whole idea.
Yes, to at least sort of just polish off the edges to keep it moving in the right direction. Because I think some of our behaviors are sort of self-balancing. You just got to. There's just a few that aren't.
Exactly.
Do you do any work with younger kids?
I go into schools and I run small prisoners dilemma tournaments as an activity and talk about that, and that's always
cool.
That's always fun. You go in and the kids are like, oh, here's someone who's literally just going to say mass is cool, and then all of a sudden I've got them stabbing each other in the back. not literally. And that's always good fun. But it's interesting then because we have a conversation about, like, well, how come they did so well? And then depending on the room, it goes again back to what I was saying about the environment, right? Depending on the room, they might be like, well, because everyone was really defecting a lot, they won because they defected a lot. But then also sometimes it's the opposite. A particular classroom will be like, well, they won because they made everyone else want to work with them, right? And the trust could kind of like build up. Yeah, I do a lot of stuff like that.
Oh, that's cool. I've had one experience doing a workshop with my daughter's class a couple of years ago. And I got a little worried I'd created a group of little Machiavellians.
Oh, no. What happened?
Well, because I'd sort of gone in and disrupted their very sort of simplistic social norms that you have in the classroom. There is actually sort of a zero-sum moral of fairness in the classroom. Nobody ever gets any more than anybody else in the classroom.
Right.
Giving them the license to not follow their classroom moral rules and follow self-serving strategy with the intention that they would learn, like you were saying before, how sort of social norms end up arising and cooperation ends up arising. Yeah. A lot of them, I think, just went the first step and just went, we're allowed to do whatever we want and stab our classmates in the back.
Yeah.
And we did get to those sort of more nuanced, developed ideas of strategies that take into account other people and cooperation and iterated games. We did some public goods games.
Ah, cool.
And they ended up being really good. They had a disaster of a public goods game, one where I'd set up this environment that had a certain amount of counters, and then you could contribute to the environment with your counters, and then you could, with privileged access, take back some profit from that, and there would be some multiplier that allowed everyone to make a small profit. But people were able to take more than their fair share. And so the first group of 10 kids, they ended up just taking back all of their investment and then taking back their investment and counters from the environment as well until there was just nothing. So the environment was acting as a multiplier for their profit. Okay, so it started with an environment. Yeah. So the idea was inspired by an extension of the tragedy of the commons called the open access problem.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
It's basically related to the environment where there's a commons that you all have access to, but it's very difficult to see what everyone's taking from it. And so you can be depleting a resource without much.
Oh, I'd love to hear. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about this because actually, I've just over the past year or so started working with the public goods game a lot, and I've been wondering about taking that into schools and how that would work. So I mean, that sounds really cool.
I'll link you to the page, but it worked really well because the next group saw that and they started to invest more. And even though there were some free riders in that group,
they're the ones that just take and don't give anything. Yeah.
Yes. So even though there were some free riders, in general, the whole group invested more than they took out. And over rounds of contribution, they ended up making a huge profit.
That's so interesting. And if you think about it, right, like you could almost use that. So the reason I'm so excited about the goods game is we're looking at the environment being literally the environment. But the fact that those two groups of students saw it one after another, you could almost like see some sort of like generational thing where, you know, the previous generation has taken everything it can from the planet. And now the new generation is like, okay, what can we do, you know, as a result of that to do a little bit better than that?
Yeah, you mentioned that you'd done some research that was applied in the real world to things like the Paris Accords. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's right. So with Sebastian, the political scientist I mentioned, we're supervising a PhD student looking at cooperation for climate agreements, right? So the United States pulling out of the Paris Agreement and things like that. All these international climate agreements where we agree as a planet or as a subgroup of countries to, you know, reduce carbon emissions, but then we just don't do it, or there's no real incentive to cooperate. And in this sense, cooperation would be reducing carbon emissions.
Yes, they're aspirational.
It's aspirational, right? So that's the idea. And there's actually some Nobel Prize winning work in this area. Not by us, really.
Give it time.
Give it time, yeah, exactly. Where a guy called Nordhaus wrote down this idea of what if we link climate emissions to trade agreements, right?
Right.
So then all of a sudden, if you and I are agreeing to reduce our emissions and we stick to it and we cooperate in that sense, we'll have a better trade between us. And so essentially that kind of starts to move us away from there being an incentive to just not. Because, you know, I as a country don't really want to reduce my carbon emissions. I want to keep burning all the stuff. But what I really want is for all the other countries to do it, right? And that's the public goods game, right? And you talked about free riders in your classroom example. Yeah. You know, everyone rationally wants to free ride if everyone else will do the right thing, right? And so how do we move that incentive? And so one idea is to expand the basic public goods game, which in a very simple way, the public goods game is just a prison's dilemma for more players. How do we link that to other things that will move our behavior away? So all of a sudden we need to change things so that defecting has a bigger cost. And Nordhaus's idea was to link that to trade agreements.
So does he have a way, because that seems an artificial relationship to set up. Is there a way that he can get both sides to buy into that?
So there is none that actually has ever existed. In other words, I'm agreeing with you, right? In other words, yes, that it is an artificial idea, and it kind of needs one or two countries to start it.
Make it cool.
Exactly. And that's where and maybe not even just make it cool, right? But make it more costly to not do it. And so
Yes.
And that's what we're looking at in the same way from a trade agreement point of view, and whether or not extortive behavior can spread in bilateral trade. What about if we can have this climate clubs, which is the name of the idea, that the climate clubs behavior spread, and what is needed for that to happen?
Right.
And what you start to get is, and we're only just starting to look at this from an evolutionary game theory point of view, but if Wales and Scotland kind of link up and decide, yeah, we'll do this, I suspect that wouldn't spread, right? I'm choosing Wales and Scotland, not to offend any of my Celtic friends.
Because you're allowed to.
But I'm allowed to, yeah.
You could put New Zealand in there as well.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, exactly.
Easily.
But I would imagine, if all of a sudden the European Union and China said, we're forming a climate club.
Yeah.
So anyone that's not going to reduce their carbon emissions has a worse trade agreement than the European Union and China, I would imagine that would spread, right? That's kind of a hopeful message, of, well, I hope to be hopeful. We're still very much the early stages of this.
Yeah, I feel like I'm usually an optimist, but with that, I feel as though you've got the worst perpetrators who are in the best position to use trade as leverage on others.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, something I was reading about recently is I think the UK on paper is doing very well in terms of its carbon emissions. Like they are decreasing and all that. But a lot of the time when people are decreasing their carbon emissions, what they're doing is, and not necessarily directly, right? They're not directly moving a coal factory somewhere else, but they're just buying or trading in the goods from somewhere else. And so, we're just moving this expenditure to this creation of carbon emissions to somewhere else. So as a planet, are we doing that? And then, it's interesting because China, for example, is one of the world leaders in solar, right? But at the same time, obviously pollution. So it's such a complicated system.
Yes, there are a lot of problems there where you have borders for certain things, but not for other things like taxes, pollution, labor rights.
In a way, it kind of comes back to what we said at the start, right? Like one of the greatest vectors for military peace has been trade agreements, right? And so maybe trade agreements is also a way to kind of deal with the climate crisis.
No, I love that. I often refer to myself as a free market socialist.
Okay, right.
Because I like the idea of providing for your population, but I also think one of the most powerful things internationally is the market in order to create peace and interdependence. Because they call it international anarchy. The relationship between different countries is actually anarchy. So there isn't a way to, without a world government, which comes with its own problems, to orchestrate the countries in a way that's well regulated. So the next best thing is the freedom of the market in order to do that. Yeah. So some people would like to implement that in their own countries, but I think countries run better when they're run by
some level of
centralized regulation to make sure that people don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah. No, I think I'd agree with that.
We can see mistakes in real time where we can see the consequences. Iran, tariffs, Ukraine. And it's difficult to see the good things that are happening. And I'm exposed to statistics that show that lots of other indicators of success are increasing over the world, like extreme poverty is going down.
Right.
So there are ways that we are shifting the world in a good direction. I'm just wondering if there's any sort of mechanism you've seen from your game theory experience, ways that you can encourage with sort of different initial conditions, encourage a whole system to go in a healthy direction.
The environment matters, right?
Yeah.
If you have more cooperators there from the start, then you might have more cooperators that evolve, right?
It
goes back to your simulation. There's small amount of defectors, they grow quick, then the cooperators are all running away from them, right? But have you seen the movie Hail Mary?
Oh, yeah.
I love that book, by the way.
My daughter is reading the book at the moment. We watched the movie a month ago. I'm waiting until she's finished with the book.
For your turn, right?
She just read The Martian.
Okay.
Because at first we couldn't get Hail Mary because it sold out everywhere. So we bought The Martian. She read that, and then we got Hail Mary, and she's reading that now.
In there, right, all of a sudden, the sun is dying. And it's almost glossed over in the movie, and it is touched upon a little bit in the book, that there is just now global cooperation, right? Like the situation is so bad that essentially everything gets given to this one person who's now in charge and just doing everything, and it doesn't matter. What do you need? You need a new boat? There's the boat, right? Like we're just doing it, right? And all the bullshit, so to speak, is kind of like taken away. So there's no chance but to cooperate. And I guess that's why climate scientists are trying to be so loud to kind of say, that is where we are, you know?
Yeah, that's sort of a movie trope, is the external invasion that unifies humanity to fight against. Yes. And we see that happen in the aftermath of world wars. It would just be nice if we could cooperate without needing an imminent disaster.
Without needing all that, right? And I guess like the slightly hopeful message is, you know, we do cooperate. Do we cooperate enough is another thing. It would be nice if we didn't need the world to fall apart completely.
Yeah, I had that hope. And it felt like it was being realized at the beginning of COVID, because especially here in New Zealand, where everybody was in the same boat and we're all following this strategy and we were all going to benefit from it, and we ended up benefiting from it.
From outside of New Zealand, I was really looking at New Zealand of like, wow, look, you can just do the right thing, you know, and all work together. Yeah, you all looked like a team. Yeah, you actually looked like
a team of 6 million, as she kept saying. And even Trump was supporting the development of the vaccine. There was some cooperation there.
One of Trump's greatest genuine achievements was, what was it called? Operation Warp Speed. You know, and now he has a Secretary of Health who's a massive anti-vaxxer, and Trump arguably is one of the best presidents for vaccinations, you know, I'm using quotation marks around everything I'm saying right now.
To find that sort of cooperation across people with such political differences was impressive for a while, until it all fell apart.
Even with masking, right? This genuine idea that you were wearing a mask not necessarily for yourself, right? Which I remember when masks were first talked about, it kind of just assumed, I'm wearing this mask to protect me. And then all of a sudden someone pointed out like, these masks aren't good enough to protect yourself, but you have to wear them to protect others, right? And then we all wear them to protect each other, right? And
others,
And there was something nice about that. Yeah. But then all of a sudden that became a signal for something else. And then there were people that would insist on not wearing masks. And then it all slowly fell apart and it became a political decision.
So there was a glimmer of hope there.
It was, yeah. I say this with an understanding that COVID had a huge impact on many people. But I look back at COVID, my son was super young and we'd go for our daily walks, and our little street that we live on, we put letters through everyone's mailbox with our phone number, and we all jumped in this big WhatsApp group, and we became so supportive of each other, right?
Yeah, one of the things which was ironic, which I really enjoyed, was the fact that because it was a special thing to go out for a walk, and because we were social distancing, you very much noticed people when you passed them on the street. So even though you were standing
that's a good point.
2 meters away from them, you noticed everybody and you said hi, and you almost kind of apologized like, oh yeah, hi, we'll try not to get too close. Whereas you might have just strolled straight past them otherwise.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I had not thought about that. You notice people. That's, and you acknowledge them. The flip side, I remember the first time I went to the supermarket coming back, I was just like, you know, I never want to go to the supermarket again. That was the worst 15 minutes, you know.
Someone's sneezing and you're like, what are you doing?
What are you doing? Or I remember being so careful. You know, everyone had different degrees of how careful they were, right? And I would be like in the middle of an aisle, waiting to go pick a tomato. And then it would eventually be my turn. And I would go, I'd get the tomato, and then someone would just come over, their hand would go past my face to just grab their cabbage or whatever with no, and I would just, and I'm sure that probably didn't give me COVID, right? But I remember at the time they were like, what are you doing?
Good times.
Good times, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really wonderful meeting you. And
likewise, James. Likewise.
There were some valuable insights there. And I think what you're doing is really interesting. So,
well, I really appreciate that. That's really nice of you to say. And thank you. And again, right, I was telling my wife some more about your podcast this morning. And I think what is so nice about it, your site and your podcast, is that you come at it from a different perspective, right? Like you are a creative person, but you have such curiosity, but you also have the patience to go into the details, right? And all that comes across. And I think it just is such a nice piece of work.
Oh, thank you. Well, this has been one of the first collaborations that I think you responded to my collaborative corner post. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I was listening to the episode on collaboration. I was like, I gotta do something. I want to do something with James. That's when I reached out. So
that's great.
Sending out the email, half expecting it to be ignored. So I was delighted that you answered me. So I'm so pleased you got to do this.
Yeah, so to anyone listening, I'm really keen to have more of these kind of conversations. You don't have to be a university professor to talk with me. Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Feel very lucky to have someone with your kind of level of expertise on the show.
Congratulations. I think it's a really, really nice project. I hope it goes on for many years.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cool. Well, thanks so much. Good night, I guess, over there. Hopefully I haven't kept you up too late.
And good morning to you. Have a nice day.